The irony that I did a video last week on health and I'm now sick is not lost on me at all. Please excuse my voice, my sniffling if it happens. I'll probably cut it out if it happens, but please excuse this. This is a video I've been wanting to do for a really long time, which is giving the tips that I have for being a freelancer. Huge disclaimer is that I can only give tips based on my own experience. I do not know everything and I do not have experience in everything. So please, if you are someone who has more advice, better advice, please leave it below. We are all here to learn. You know that experience you have when you leave high school and you're like, wow, I wish that they had taught me all of these things that they actually didn't teach me, like how to do my tax. Yeah, that's extra fun when you then become a freelancer. Not only did I go to high school, but I went to a tertiary education provider, university, private one as well, that was specific to the industry I work in and the job I now do, where I would very comfortably say that like 80% of people freelance in at some point in their career, maybe even 90%. And even there, we didn't learn anything about how to actually operate yourself as a business, how to manage life freelancing, how you even go about any of that. Any of those things was never discussed. When I started learning this information, it was not delivered to me in a language that I understood, so it still wasn't very accessible anyway. Please leave your comments below of any advice that you have or tips and tricks that really worked for you when you were freelancing or freelancing specifically in this industry. If you are someone who has actual financial skills and training, you would be very helpful for this video. I am not. I'm just a random person who has worked as a freelancer. Here are some of the things that I wish I knew when I started freelancing in this industry at the ripe old age of 18. Let's start with the definition of what freelancing even is. Freelancers are self-employed and hired to work for different companies on particular assignments. A contractor is a person or firm that undertakes a contract to provide materials or labor to perform a service or do a job. A sole trader is a person who is the exclusive owner of a business, entitled to keep all profits after tax has been paid out, but liable for all losses, and they can have employees. All of those sound very, very similar because they are. How you choose to define yourself, I think, fits into some of those smaller things, like whether you have employees, whether you are providing materials for the labor and not just your own services. I have always just referred to myself when I'm freelancing as a freelancer, being someone who is self-employed and hired to do a particular assignment for someone. For example, going into a venue to do a gig. Let's talk about ABNs. My experience of working has only been in Australia, so all of my advice and information is specific to working within Australia. The first thing that someone will ask you for when you are freelancing is for your ABN or your Australian business number. It's an 11-digit number that's basically used by the taxation office to make sure that no one is doing sneaky laundering kind of shit with finances and that we aren't getting paid money that they can't tax. If this kind of thing sounds familiar, it's probably because you already have a TFN, a tax file number, which is a very similar kind of idea, but a tax file number is for all people who work, but every business needs an ABN. And if you are a contractor, sole trader, or freelancer, you are a business. I will leave links to all of the places that you can find some information about each of these things in the description below. So I will leave some information or a link you can follow to information about your ABN down below. People will not hire you unless you have an ABN. Oh boy, oh wow, the biggest one of all is your rate. How to set your rate. This was the biggest, most confusing part of starting to freelance, and it's still something that I've struggled with as my career has progressed. And around last year, I kind of started actually looking at award rates, and that just made me wish that I had thought about or had known about my award rates when I was setting my rates as a freelancer. Over the years, there's a lot of different things that I've taken into account to set my rate, like if doing this work means that I cannot accept other work, and if I am only a freelancer and I need to make a certain amount of money to survive, then that job needs to pay for my life in the time that I'm doing that job. But over time, you will start to adjust your rate based on experience, expertise, having multiple people wanting you for jobs and being able to go with the person who's willing to pay you the most. But when you're first setting your rate, how the hell do you comfortably put a price on your work? I know it's something I really struggled with, and I know that pretty much every freelancer I've ever met has struggled with that, especially in a creative industry where it's really hard to put a cost on our labor. What I wish I'd known when I was doing this is that every job falls into an award, and every award has an award rate, which is basically a minimum wage for that job based on a bunch of different things. This is government specified, so I think it's a pretty solid place to base your own rate off of. A lot of places, especially venues, I found would reach out and be like, hey, there's a gig that we are offering you, the pay is this much, these are the details, and you can say yes or no. But if I'm ever contacted by an artist, if I'm ever contacted by a band that wants to take me to mix a show, or a gig that is asking me to do multiple jobs like design and touring and all of these things, they might ask me what my rate is. You may need more details to feel like you can accurately give a rate that reflects the work you're doing, which is totally fair. I used to have a list of questions that I would need answered before I was able to comfortably set a rate, including like how long the gig actually goes for, how many sets there are, what the run sheet for the gig is, so that I could actually see how much downtime and breaks am I going to have, how many bands are there, am I going to be rushing around between sets to sort things out and change things for the next people, or will I be having quite a chill time? How strenuous is the actual work? Is it a lights up, mic up kind of gig where I'm just sitting there just in case anything goes wrong and to bring in house music? Or am I going to be mixing and monitoring and fixing problems the entire time? How long is the pack down going to be? How long is the sound check going to be? All of those kind of things would go into then what I would claim for my rate. At first, I used to just do I'm working for this many hours, I'm charging this much an hour, so therefore the gig is this. Over time, I realized I didn't feel really comfortable with that because, like I said, some gigs, if it was a comedy gig, I would be there for 5 hours, but I would just be pushing up a couple of faders and turning on a couple of things. Pack down would take me 10 minutes. It didn't feel fair to the client or to myself to charge the same amount for a gig like that as it did to charge for a metal gig with 5 bands that did full changeovers, everyone needed a sound check, and at the end of the night, the pack down was incredibly long. You can absolutely make your rate whatever you want as a freelancer, but I would recommend having a look at your award rate and maybe trying to base it off that, keeping in mind the amount of things that you are entitled to or the payments that would be made if you were working for another company, and making sure you give those to yourself. I will touch more on that in a second, but one of the great things about basing your wage or your rate for a gig off of the award rate is that if anyone tries to argue with you about it or would like a breakdown as to why it is what it is, you've got a clear layout of why things cost a certain amount based on something that is the government supplied minimum wage for a job in your industry. If someone argues that it isn't within their budget, that is then up to you how much wiggle room you have to accommodate that. Just because someone cannot afford you does not mean that you need to devalue yourself or your service. Do not let people walk all over you because of their money management or what they have to do their gig. Everyone still deserves to get paid. Have I done cheap gigs, free gigs, traded gigs for other things? Absolutely. But as a standard, this is a business transaction. Remove the emotion and make sure that you're taking care of yourself. There is a tool on the Fair Work website which I have used many times to make sure that my award is being followed correctly, that my rate is correct. It helps you figure out what your award is and what your position is based on their descriptions as well, and that then helps you figure out what your rate should be. I will leave it linked below. Definitely go and check it out, even if you are not freelancing and you are just living and working in that award. It is really helpful to know what is in that award, which leads me to entitlements. Know your entitlements. Know what you are entitled to while working. Breaks, meal times, travel, per diems, days off, sick days, annual leave. All of these things are covered in your award. This can help you start to think about like the boundaries you want to put in place working in terms of when you're freelancing and you are the one who is having to monitor and manage the workplace and the work that you're doing. Sometimes if you're on another job, there'll be someone leading a crew who is like, yep, it's this time, we need to take a break. It's been 5 hours, so we have to take a break. If you are the only one there doing your job and you're freelancing, you are the person who has to stand up and make sure that that happens. It also helps you figure out your rate a little bit further. If you know that you are working long enough according to your award rate that you would get a meal allowance legally, put that into your rate. And then again, if anyone has an issue with the rate, these are the things that you can further put into it to break it down. It is entirely up to you what you choose, but the award is a really great way to figure out your entitlements, your pay, and those kind of things if you're stuck. Because as I said, it's really hard to put dollar value on your work, especially if you are working in the arts or you are just starting out, but you can't argue with what is literally specified by the government according to the award rate rate that you would be getting paid if you were being employed by somebody else. One of the biggest tips that I can give you through working and being employed or contracted by somebody else, even if you are signing a contract for a job or you are freelancing and signing on to do a job, get everything in writing. If you have a phone call about the job, what it's going to be like, what will be going on the day, what your pay is going to be, what you're going to be entitled to, after the phone call, write down an email and be like, hey, just wanted to send an email to lay out everything we just spoke about, XYZ things, there we go. Because God forbid you end up in a situation where you have not been paid, you have been taken advantage of, someone is just trying to take you for a ride. If you've got that in writing, you have something. I have seen situations where people have gone to tribunals with their employers and the person who has the evidence has the grounds. Even if it's just in email, there is at least proof of the discussion that you have had with someone that is your agreement. If you are not sure of something clarified in your contract, ask about it. Ask for it to be laid out so clearly in writing that you understand everything that is in there so that you know what's going on, so that if something is not done right, you have grounds to take it higher. Perfect example is that my last contract and my next contract have different pay structures. A lot of companies in the arts try to adjust the way that they do overtime, sick pay, all of those kind of things to actually more accurately match our industry and what the work is like. So you'll find, or at least I've found, that in a lot of those contracts, things are very different depending on the companies that you're working with. And if I don't understand what they're saying, or I'm unsure of it, or it seems a little bit odd and I've not done it before, I will ask stupid questions. I will be like, just to clarify, does this mean XYZ in simple terms? And they will say yes or no, and they explain it to me or agree that I am correct. It's not something that I ever did while I was freelancing previously. For the last couple of years, I've not really been freelancing much because I've been in theatre. But when I go back into freelancing at any point, I am going to explore the idea of having some kind of contract, even just a small one, some kind of contractual paper that I provide to an employer about my services, about what I'm entitled to, what they are paying me, specific for each job, so that they can tick off on it, sign off on it, have it there. They know I've sent it to them. I have it in email and in writing that it's been sent to them, so that it's all laid out, it's all clear, and I can further protect my professional and working boundaries because the boundaries have already been set. Tax. If you're employed by somebody else, they keep a percentage of your pay to go towards paying your tax, and you then will get a tax return after all of the things that we are taxed on are removed. That could include your HECS debt, Medicare fees, all those kind of things. If you are your own boss, if you are getting paid a freelancer rate, you need to keep aside your own tax. It is wildly confusing. It is really easy to forget. It's something that I really struggled with when I was starting as a freelancer because I was living paycheck to paycheck. I didn't have room within that paycheck to put aside tax. Very smart people will keep a little bit of each paycheck they get aside so that they've got their tax just sitting there. What worked for me, instead of doing that, because when I was 18, 19, first living out of home in a city and struggling to afford existence, instead of putting aside little bits of my paycheck every single week, I would wait until I did my tax to see if I even owed any tax, because if you earn under a certain amount of money in a year, you don't pay tax. And when I was first starting, I wasn't necessarily earning enough to be paying for tax anyway. But if you do owe tax, you have a certain amount of time to pay it off. And financial year is June, and then you have until about November of that same year to pay it off. I found that way easier for me to keep up with. It didn't stress me out as much. It was something that was there already. I knew how much it was, and I could go, great, so over the next XYZ amount of weeks, I have to give this much money towards paying that off, which I found that worked for me. Other people are able to set money aside as they go and calculate what their tax would be out of that pay. I'm not good with numbers. I really struggled with the financial side of things, so that didn't work for me. That works for you, go off. But if you are someone like me who struggled with that side of things, you've got time to pay it off. Is it the best way to do it? Maybe not. And you can waste time and energy trying to force yourself to do things the best way, which is a way that doesn't work for you, or you can just make your own rules, which is part of the beauty of being a freelancer, and do things the way that work for you. While being on the topic of tax, claim everything on tax. Keep track of all your expenses and invoices. I always keep a folder in my email, and I also keep a physical folder in the human flesh of life as well that are my invoices, receipts for things that I can claim tax on. So then at the end of the financial year, you just have to go into those two folders, collect all of those things, add up all those numbers and put them in any clothing you buy to wear to work, whether that's black pants, black boots, merch, shirts to do with shows and venues so that you are wearing their clothes, meals you have to have on jobs, travel you do towards jobs. I used to have a specific Opal card for when I would travel to and from venues, and every week I would put a certain amount of money on that and save the receipt, so I had an exact amount of money for how much travel I was doing to work. If you ever go out with an employer to discuss a job over a meal or a drink, claim those on tax. Accommodation, if you ever have to go somewhere to work and they don't put you up. Training, which does include going to gigs, concerts, theater shows if you are working in the arts. Claim those on tax. It just means that whatever tax you end up owing, if you end up owing tax, will be lesser because of the claims you've made. My final tip for being a freelancer is to make a website. This is something that I only did during the last lockdown that we had in New South Wales, and it has been one of the best things I've ever done for myself. Always have an updated CV, but I found that a lot of times people wanted to see examples of the work I had done, and it also just looks nicer. It is a place where people can see what work you've done, photos and videos of the work you've done, places you've worked. They can contact you and reach you, and you can put in there whatever you want. My website has everything that anyone would need to know who I am, what I do, what I've done, and how to contact me about those things. It has references from people that I have worked with. It has specified locations to find all of my work in different parts of the industry, like cabaret, theater, music, burlesque, comedy. It has access to my YouTube channel, which is great because it gives employers a chance to actually see me at work, to see my passion for my workplace. It also is a great tool for if employers are wanting to see what the content I make looks like. If I'm wanting to film in those places, they can see that it does look professional and complementary to the jobs I'm doing. You can see all the venues I've worked in, the festivals I have worked on, the professional theater shows that I have done. There is a section about me, about how I got into the job, about the qualifications that I do have, about what my values are around my work. You can see photos of my recent work. You can see descriptions of the kind of services that I offer. You can get tickets to upcoming shows that I'm working on, and you can contact me all through that page. Like I said, always have an updated CV that you can send employers, but it's also really beautiful to have a website, to have a place where people can look online to see the kind of things you've done, what you're doing next, and it just looks a little bit more captivating than a CV. Anyway, that's it for this time. Those are my tips for working as a freelancer, specifically in the arts, but I'm sure there are parts of it that apply to other kinds of freelancing as well. If you are someone who has other tips and tricks and little bits of advice that you have collected through your years of freelancing and your experience, please leave them below. If I get enough of them, I might make a part 2 with your tips and tricks and advice in freelancing. Again, apologies for my voice and my sickness. I will see you next week. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel so you see the next videos that go live, and make sure you're following me on Instagram so that you can see when videos go live and also be the first to know what my next show is before it is featured here on the channel.